May 26, 1941, the North Atlantic, 690 nautical miles west of Brest. A formation of 15 aircraft claws through rain squalls at 90 miles an hour. Open cockpits, fixed wheels hanging beneath fabric-covered wings, biplanes that looked more like something from the Western Front than the deck of a modern aircraft carrier. Below them, alone on a gray sea, steamed the newest, fastest, most heavily armored battleship in the world. Bismarck, 50,000 tons, 8 15-inch guns, a top speed of 30 knots. She had sunk HMS Hood 3 days earlier in under 4 minutes, killing all but 3 of her 1,500 crew. The Royal Navy had thrown its fastest ships into the chase, and Bismarck was still pulling away, running for the safety of occupied France and the cover of the Luftwaffe. The aircraft, closing on her now, were Fairey Swordfish, a design so outdated the Fleet Air Arm's own pilots called it the Stringbag. Top speed slower than many of the anti-aircraft guns tracking it could be depressed to fire. In the next 90 seconds, one of those aircraft would put a single torpedo into the one part of Bismarck that no armor plate could protect and end the chase for good. This is how a biplane built from wire and canvas defeated the most modern battleship ever put to sea. By the spring of 1941, the Kriegsmarine surface raider strategy had one objective: sever Britain's Atlantic lifeline. Bismarck and the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen sailed from the Baltic on May 18th under Admiral Günther Lutyens, tasked with breaking into the convoy lanes and sinking merchant shipping faster than it could be replaced. On May 24th in the Denmark Strait, Bismarck's third salvo found HMS Hood's magazines. The Royal Navy's most famous battlecruiser vanished in an explosion, visible for miles. HMS Prince of Wales, only weeks out of the builder's yard with dockyard workers still aboard fixing turret faults, took several hits and broke off. Bismarck was damaged too. A hit had holed her fuel bunkers and left an oil slick trailing behind her, but she was still faster than anything the home fleet could bring to bear, and she was now heading for Saint-Nazaire, where French dry docks and German air cover would make her untouchable. The Admiralty's problem was simple arithmetic. Bismarck's speed advantage meant that if she reached the range of Luftwaffe bombers based in France, no surface force could catch her. The only asset capable of slowing her down before then was carrier aviation, and the only carrier in range was HMS Ark Royal, 400 miles to the southeast, carrying obsolete torpedo bombers that German naval intelligence had assessed as a negligible threat. The Swordfish had entered service in 1936. By 1941, every major air force in Europe considered the biplane torpedo bomber finished. It cruised at approximately 90 knots and topped out near 138. Its airframe was fabric over a steel tube structure. Its undercarriage was fixed, not retractable, adding drag the aircraft could not afford. It carried a crew of 2 or 3 in open cockpits, exposed to freezing spray at low altitude and icing conditions at height. Compare that to Bismarck's anti-aircraft defense: 16 10.5-centimeter heavy flak guns, 16 3.7-centimeter guns, and a battery of 2-centimeter cannon, all directed by radar-fed fire control that had been designed to track aircraft closing at 200 knots or more. German gunnery officers later admitted the problem outright. Their predictors could not generate a firing solution for a target moving as slowly as a swordfish. The automatic systems built to lead a fast target threw shells well ahead of an aircraft that simply wasn't there yet by the time the shell arrived. The weapon considered too slow to matter was, by pure engineering irony, too slow to hit. If you're finding this look at how the Fleet Air Arm punched above its weight interesting, subscribing takes a second and helps the channel keep telling these stories properly. The first strike came on the afternoon of May 24th from Victorious, newly commissioned and rushed into service with barely trained aircrew. 9 Swordfish attacked in deteriorating weather and scored a single hit amidships that did negligible damage to the armored belt. Bismarck steamed on. Then on the night of May 25th, contact was lost entirely. For 31 hours, the home fleet searched an empty ocean while Bismarck ran for France. her lead widening by the hour. She was reacquired on the morning of May 26th by a Royal Air Force Catalina flying boat, and the calculation became brutal. Ark Royal's Swordfish, operating from 21st Aircraft Carrier Squadron under Vice Admiral James Somerville's Force H, were the last chance before Bismarck crossed into the protective air umbrella from Brest. The sea was rough, Force 8, with Ark Royal's flight deck pitching through 56 feet of vertical movement. A first strike of 14 Swordfish, launched at 1450 hours and very nearly ended in catastrophe. Radar operators aboard Ark Royal had failed to warn the strike leader that a Royal Navy cruiser, HMS Sheffield, had been detached ahead to shadow Bismarck directly, and now sat in the attack zone. The Swordfish, briefed to expect only Bismarck, attacked Sheffield by mistake. Several torpedoes were fitted with new magnetic detonators, designed to trigger beneath a ship's hull without a direct impact. In the heavy swell, several exploded prematurely on contact with the water itself. Sheffield escaped by violent evasive maneuvering. Not one hit. The strike returned to Ark Royal, rearmed with older contact-fused torpedoes, and prepared to try again with the light fading and time running out. At 10 hours, 15 Swordfish took off in worsening weather for what everyone aboard Ark Royal understood was the last possible attempt. They found Bismarck at 2047, and Lieutenant Commander Tim Coode led them into a coordinated attack from multiple bearings simultaneously, forcing Bismarck's captain to choose which threat to turn into and exposing her to torpedoes from the opposite side, regardless of which way she turned. Bismarck's anti-aircraft fire was intense. Sub-Lieutenant John Moffat, piloting one of the Swordfish, had already lost part of his aircraft's tailplane fabric to flak splinters and pressed on regardless. Flying at little more than 50 feet above the wave tops to keep below the depression angle of Bismarck's main and secondary batteries, Moffat's aircraft released its torpedo at close range. 2 hits are generally credited to the attack. One struck amidships against the main belt and caused only superficial damage. The armor did its job. The second struck the stern, on the port side, near the rudders. That single hit changed the outcome of the war at sea. The explosion jammed Bismarck's port rudder at a 12-degree angle and damaged the steering gear compartment beyond effective repair at sea. German damage control teams worked for hours in flooded listing compartments trying to free the mechanism. They could not. Bismarck could now only steer using her engines, alternating power to port and starboard screws, a crude method that left her turning in slow circles, unable to hold a course toward France. Admiral Lütjens signaled Berlin that the ship was no longer maneuverable. The chase that Bismarck's speed had been winning was over, decided not by a bigger gun or a faster ship, but by a single torpedo dropped from an aircraft designed before most of her crew had joined the Navy. Overnight, 5 destroyers under Captain Philip Vian harassed the crippled battleship with torpedo attacks in heavy seas, preventing any rest for her exhausted crews and confirming her position for the battleships, now closing from the northeast. At dawn, on May 27th, HMS Rodney and HMS King George V opened fire at approximately 0847 hours. Rodney's 9 16-inch guns and King George V's 10 14-inch guns pounded Bismarck at closing range, while she could only reply erratically, unable to maneuver, her own fire control disrupted by the damage and the pounding she was absorbing. By 1,000 hours, her guns had fallen silent and her upper works were wrecked. The cruiser, HMS Dorsetshire, finished her with torpedoes, and Bismarck sank at approximately 10:40 hours. Fewer than 115 of her crew, of over 2,200, survived. The ship that had destroyed Hood in under 4 minutes and outrun the home fleet for 2 days had been immobilized in the dark by a fabric-covered biplane, carrying a single torpedo built to a specification from the previous decade. The strategic consequence extended well beyond one sunk battleship. Hitler, already skeptical of the surface fleet's value, curtailed further independent Atlantic sorties by German capital ships for the remainder of the war. Tirpitz, Bismarck's sister ship, would spend most of her career sheltering in Norwegian fjords, rather than risk open ocean deployment. The Kriegsmarine's surface raiding strategy against convoys, the entire purpose of building Bismarck in the first place, was effectively abandoned in favor of the U-boat campaign. A single torpedo hit from an aircraft type already scheduled for replacement had ended Germany's surface battleship threat to the Atlantic convoys for the rest of the war. The Swordfish itself outlived every aircraft that was meant to replace it. Its intended successor, the ferry Albacore, entered service and was retired from frontline duty before the Swordfish was. The type that everyone agreed was finished in 1936 was still flying operational combat sorties in 1945, sinking more Axis tonnage than any other Fleet Air Arm aircraft of the war, hunting U-boats from small escort carriers in the Atlantic, right through to the war's end. Its slowness, the very quality that made it look obsolete on paper, gave it a stall speed low enough to operate off tiny escort carrier decks in weather that grounded faster aircraft and gave German gunners a target their equipment simply could not solve for. Bismarck's own after-action reports, recovered and studied by Allied intelligence, confirmed what the raw statistics already suggested. The ship with the most advanced fire control radar in the German fleet had been undone by the one aircraft flying too slowly for that radar to matter. The lesson of May 26, 1941, was not that the biplane was secretly a good aircraft on paper. It was not. Its speed, its armament, its protection were all inferior to the aircraft replacing it in every other air force in Europe. The lesson was that a weapon system's value is decided by the mission, not the specification sheet, and that the Fleet Air Arm's aircrew, flying open cockpit biplanes into radar-directed flak in a Force 8 gale at last light, delivered what no faster, better protected aircraft in the world could have delivered that evening, because no faster aircraft was in range. Bismarck's designers had built the most powerful battleship afloat. They had not built a ship that could survive an obsolete torpedo bomber finding her rudder in the dark. 90 seconds and one hit were enough. The most modern battleship in the world went to the bottom of the Atlantic, beaten by an aircraft it should never have had to fear.